to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean M. McKinda, Esquire.
And I am your most excellent host, Jack Jackson Keller.
And that means only one thing. We're talking about Bill and Ted this week. Ahead of the release of the final movie in the trilogy, Bill and Ted Face the Music. That's right, we're going for the SEO juice this week, don't you worry.
Been a long time since we did that shit.
Been a long time since we had any SEO 2 chase. We thought we'd go back and kick off a month of just feeling good movies that just like we want to sit down and watch and not stare into the void after with some Bill and Ted. A movie I haven't seen in probably 20 years. A set of movies that I haven't seen in probably 20 years because, yes, we watched both Excellent Adventure and Bogus Journey.
Which are incredible titles, really.
They really are.
Maybe the greatest titles of any film of all time.
So Jackson, you, I know, are completely new to the Bill and Ted journey, the Bill and Ted oeuvre. Where are you coming in at with this? Like, what are your early thoughts?
So I guess, like, to illustrate my familiarity with Bill and Ted, you know, last week I said going in that I knew only a few things. I knew that it was Keanu Reeves and some other guy, which, you know, really was some other guy. It's apparently a common point of contention that he's only known as Bill S. Preston Esquire, the poor bastard.
You know what? Alex Winters.
Alex Winters. Well, you know, we'll give him the shout out. So I was right on that. You know, I knew there was time travel. I knew that the protagonist had I didn't say this last week, but I did know the protagonist had a very particular way of speaking. And yeah, that was about it. 80s time travel, Keanu Reeves, some other guy.
So you had a lot to experience for the first time with these movies then.
Yeah. And you know what? I gotta say, I was completely entranced by the Excellent Adventure. There are some times where I'm like, you know, pausing a movie, like even if I'm enjoying it, where I'll pause a movie to like see how much time I have left because I got to go do other things. I was just, you know, glued to the screen the entire time. So excellent is the Excellent Adventure. By contrast, I spent most of my time with Bogus Journey playing Fall Guys and like, you know, having it in front of the other screen and like watching it in my peripheral vision. Pretty early on, I think about half an hour in, I'm like, I kind of get it, and started to play Fall Guys. That's not to say that I thought it was horrible. It's in some ways pretty inspired for a sequel, especially for the time. But I have a grand thesis for why the Bogus Journey did not thrill and delight me as excellently as the Excellent Adventure did. But we can you know put that on the back burner for a hot minute.
I, as I said, have watched these movies before. I remember liking them as a child, but I have been long on the record as saying that as a child, I was a complete idiot and did not know what a good movie was at all. I am proud to say that I knew that Alien vs. Predator Requiem was absolute ass. I am happy that has not changed. But I still did not know what a good movie was. So when I knew I liked Bill and Ted, I was kind of like, are these going to be good? Especially because I know Jackson isn't a huge fan of like just straight comedies. Is he going to enjoy them? Is this just going to be kind of a bummer episode in which we just talk about an all right couple of films, or at best, or a bad couple of films at worst? And I am happy to report that these movies are, in fact, quite enjoyable still. The first one, Excellent Adventure, is, as Jackson has put it many times, excellent. It still holds up really, really well. It's smart, it's funny, it's well-paced. It never outstays its welcomes in any of its moments. It's a great film. Still highly recommended. I was a little bit more favorable towards Bogus Journey than Jackson was, but I will agree that it has some... they're not really problems, I would say. They're just not as strong moments as Excellent Adventure. It gets a little bit weaker in a lot of ways, where it just kind of is trying to one up, but also recognize the first movie in a lot of weird situations. And so you kind of get a movie that is both more impressive and less impressive at the same time. They're both still really good movies. I would still recommend them. But like, if you do plan on watching both of them, maybe have something handy to do while watching the second one. Play Fall Guys or a puzzle or something like that, because you don't need to give it your full attention. Whereas the first one, I do think that there are enough little quick jokes and visual gags and smart stuff that you should pay attention to. Otherwise, you will miss them.
I mean, forget whether or not you should pay attention. You're going to want to pay attention just because the first movie is such a, like, it's such a weird thing to say for this kind of movie, but it is weirdly, like, tight and cohesive for what, like, a wacky nonsense movie it is. And I think that's the main difference, is that the first one is very cohesive in a lot of ways, and the second one isn't, leaving it basically on the strength of its individual bits. And there are good bits, but like I think it contributed to that feeling of like, I'm going to put Fall Guys, which was definitely the exact level of activity to complement this. Yeah, like, you know, I'll play some Fall Guys, I'll get eliminated, it'll load, I'll look up, I'll watch for a bit, something funny happens, I won't start another round, then I'll get kind of bored, and then I'll be like, whatever, I can wait for another one to go, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it is. I definitely found myself checking my phone, playing Picross while I was watching this film, just because, you know, sometimes just like, yeah, I get it. This happened. Just move on to the next scene. We're fine. Yeah. The one thing that I do just in general want to mention about the fact that these movies did come out in 89 and 91 is that they haven't really aged that much. Just in terms of like, when you go back and watch movies from the 70s and 80s, some of the jokes will end up falling flat because they are now gross faux pas against women, minorities. And for the most part, Bill and Ted have not aged in that way, mostly because the jokes aren't really at the expense of anyone. I do have to put a caveat on what I'm saying here, and I'll get to that in a second. But Bill and Ted, like, just the ethos of the film is not really to bully anyone. Like, the stated theme is be excellent to each other. And so the jokes are mostly like, look at the wacky situation, not Bill and Ted being like, ha ha, you got run over by a car or something like that. There's nothing gross in that way. It's very much just like, dude, we're two idiots and we're going through history to finish our history report. What a wacky set of adventures. Or, dude, we just died. How do we get back to life? And so it's surprisingly wholesome. It's not dated in that gross way, except for the use of the F slur. And it is used 3 times across both movies. Once in the first movie after just a loving, friendly embrace, which is incredibly jarring, especially after they have spent the entire lead up to this point just being incredibly nice and loving to each other.
There's so much of a unit that, like, if you ask me to, like, name character traits that Bill and Ted share individually, I could not do it. They are functionally one character.
And I mean, they even make jokes about that in the next movie when they have their princesses and they go, oh man, when we're married, do you think the princesses will come over to our house? Like, even in marriage, they are not separating. They are going to be one cohesive unit. And so, like, this slur is very jarring. It is of its time. It is something that isn't necessarily out of place given a 90s teenager to say. That doesn't make it less jarring today and less offensive today. The sequel has it twice, once from the evil Bill and Ted, and once from Ted yelling at Beelzebub. And it is bad still. Like, it's a little less jarring because you are a little bit more primed for it after the first one, but it is still the F slur thrown out amongst a rather wholesome, pretty much family-friendly PG movie. So take that as you will.
If nothing else, it's incredible how far we've come in terms of like gay issues, that even two men hugging each other would be like grounds for them to say that, and to say that in what is ostensibly a kids movie. Like you couldn't get away with that in like a PG-13 movie. Only like the grittiest of dramas could really get away with having slurs in them, and even then, it's not handled right. There'll usually be a pretty big blowback. So not that things are perfect, but I mean, it's the 80s. We've improved at least one way from the 80s.
That is why it is jarring, is because we have improved. But it is still definitely worth mentioning if that is something that would be upsetting, and I completely respect that. So.
100%. If you're gonna revisit these movies, especially because it is so, and I guess to segue away from this unfortunate business, I think that for the most part with the characters, when you say that like the comedy doesn't come at anyone's expense, even though there's a lot of like dumb guy humor, like it's not like mean dumb guy humor. Bill and Ted are so comically stupid that they are like the broadest caricature of a teenage boy in a way that like even an insecure teenage boy can laugh at. Like what never failed to get me was every time they called Socrates Socrates. Like that's and like how that ended up like a bunch of other characters were calling him that too. That was like that's funny as fuck. Or like the fact that they so cartoonishly one of the best scenes in the first one is when they like lean into the time travel nonsense. And I mean, I just gotta put this out there. I'm always a sucker for time travel. I'm a sucker for wacky time travel. I'm a sucker for dramatic time travel. I'm a sucker for confusing, convoluted time travel. I'm a sucker for like simple, children's story time travel. I love me some time travel. And this movie does not disappoint, especially when they just bumble into a elaborate like jailbreak scene that, they just on the fly like say to themselves and, the future selves have set up everything. It's great. It's wonderful. It's a good meme. And the fact that they're so stupid makes it even better.
I mean, honestly, as you're talking about this, if anyone is the butt of any joke, it is Napoleon Bonaparte or Death. Death himself, the living incarnate of death. Like, these are the two people who end up being the butt of jokes. No one's gonna get up in arms about either of those two things, especially because the joke is not like about Napoleon Bonaparte. They're just like, look at him. He's an idiot who doesn't understand bowling.
Yeah, my man, it's almost kind of sweet in a way. This is the first time Napoleon's ever had the chance to try ice cream. Aw.
Yeah, it's fish out of water stuff, which is not. It's more laughing at the experience rather than the expense of the character. They do Melvin Death, which I suppose is at the expense of death, but.
But also Death wasn't a real person, and granted, the fact that like I don't know how many people would be generally too upset about Napoleon in particular. I feel like he's the perfect historical figure for this. Like, just morally ambiguous enough, like a warmonger who went and conquered, but also like introduced and retained some reforms of the French Revolution that like you don't see Napoleon. It's not like if you had included like Hitler or Stalin or even like a lesser dictator like that. He's just distant enough. He's just like uptight enough to make that fish out of water stuff funny, but also like memeable enough because everyone memes how short he is and how he does that thing with his hand and that one famous portrait that he does all throughout this movie when he's standing at rest. He was the perfect historical figure for the fish out of water stuff, and they milked it for all it was worth. I
mean, it is interesting the historical figures they chose because it doesn't feel like any of them are particularly beloved, but like they're all well known enough. Like they don't pull. I mean, Abraham Lincoln's there, but Abraham Lincoln is barely there, just enough to be like, hey, it's that guy. But they don't do much with him, honestly, which is good. I mean, I think that's the smart move. I genuinely do.
Yeah,
but
I mean, they do have him. I mean, fuck. I just realized that like I spoiled an entire late game joke earlier.
I mean, A, this is all absolutely staying in, even though your voice changed in a way that would indicate that you think it's not. But it is.
No. My voice changed because like it only just dawned on me that I didn't give a fuck about spoilers. But fucking, it's Bill and Ted. I don't give a fuck about spoilers.
To be fair, even what you are saying does not make sense in context. Like that late game spoiler, quote unquote, is not really a spoiler because there's no explanation of anything else going on around it. So
True.
I let it slide for just that reason.
Sure. But yeah, like Abe Lincoln, like the most Abe Lincoln really does is he gets to say, you know, be excellent to each other, which is, you know, which I think is appropriate for probably the most beloved of the historical figures, the most like revered. You might get some Schroeder from Charlie Brown like up in arms about that. That was Beethoven, right? I'm not.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, I'm like shit because when they first introduced him, I'm like, all right, it's gonna be some pianist, but like I don't know if it's gonna be like
pianist.
Most far out.
Form follows function here. All right, you say pianist when we're talking about Bill and Ted, I'm gonna laugh at pianist.
That's fair. Wowie zowie. Also, can I just say that like we need to start saying bogus again?
Yes, on board with that.
Yeah, like just some of the language. It's funny because it feels very particular, but it also is just generally like obviously exaggerated, but still like actual slang that teenagers would have used back then. They're a little more verbose than your average like dude bros.
God, I love how verbose they are. It's so good. That like genuinely this movie is surprisingly smart. Just like given how well Bill talks and just constant stupid sight gags that only make sense if you know the historical figure. So you're talking about Beethoven. You might be talking about this moment. Continue.
You can imagine the first movie in particular, like turning out a very different way if it was like an Adam Sandler movie, for example. But really, it's like a perfect comedy premise. The comedy premise of two like dumb fuck bros have to stumble into a time machine to pass their history test. I mean, it's perfect. Like you've done half the movie already. And the fact that like they do it with such care and such an eye for detail, like you were saying, is what makes this like a truly a special treat and not something that is just like a throwaway comedy. And I think that's one of the things that's maybe more missing from the second one as it tries to go a bit more bold and brash in places. With the first one, it's got that perfect combination of like an excellent comedy premise, just a really memorable central performance, if we're going to consider Bill and Ted one character, like just how particular like their speech patterns are, and they're not like especially well-developed characters. I can't remember if I said this only in the pre-discussion or here, but if you ask me to name a trait that between them, like to differentiate them, Ted is slightly dumber, I guess, maybe, but that's about it. Otherwise, they're essentially the same character. But the fact that like they're just so fun and fun in a way that it isn't just nice. Like, it's not just that they're nice and wholesome, although they are, which is, again, you could easily imagine the low-hanging fruit of, like, with that premise of dude bros travel back in time to have mean-spirited teenage boys.
Perfect example, just to jump in, because I want to talk about Beethoven for just a quick second.
Yeah.
The Beethoven, when they go back to get him, big loud noise, they land in Beethoven thing as he's doing the piano. Everyone else in the room looks, Beethoven doesn't. Beethoven was deaf. That's the joke. They don't then go up to him and be like, hey, Beethoven, you're deaf, ha, 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 or anything like that. Like, that is low-hanging, mean-spirited, and shitty to do. Like, that is ableist garbage. But this is just, like, a quick thing that underscores something that we know about this historical figure and is a small, funny little beat. it's clever, but not mean.
And if anything, the joke is at the expense of Bill and Ted for just like, running up to him and like kidnapping him in the middle of his performance.
Yeah.
For having no, like absolutely zero like social graces or zero concern for like, the impact on the timeline or whatever. And that's great. And I think that just as a consequence of the fact that Bill and Ted are such like wholesome, sincere guys, is that I think that the thread, if I had to say like, the first movie's cohesive, like what is it cohesive around? I would say a general feeling of like being young, or maybe more specifically, like the positive feelings that come with being a teenager. Like this idea that the whole plot of the movie is that this one history test between them is literally the most important event in the entire timeline of the universe. And like there is not a better way to sum up how silly being a teenager is in a way that's like not mean. And that, yeah, a lot of being a teenager is stupid, and it is like trite, and it doesn't matter, but it feels like it does. It feels like it's the most important thing at the time. And I think what makes this movie so delightful is how, because everything Bill and Ted do is like, they're dipshits, but they're fun dipshits. That like they're bros, but they're not horrible, like mean, more realistic like teenage bros. They literally be excellent to each other and party on. Like that's it. That's the ethos of Bill and Ted. And you know what? It's a hell of an ethos, I gotta say.
It's absolutely wonderful, and it is a great way for us to begin a month of us not looking into the void, because that's just nice. It's just nice. These movies are just nice in this hellscape of 2020.
That sort of cohesion, because it's not even a theme. It's just more of like a feeling. And I think the fact that it is dated not in like the F-slur way, but in like it's so like painfully 80s way, like I think that only helps. And that like even if we in particular don't have any nostalgia for this time period, I think culturally like there's been enough media in like that kind of 30-40 year cycle vein of like trying to conditioning us to see 80s iconography as nostalgic. That even helps like this overall good time vibe of we're just gonna be a couple of dipshits. We're not like we don't like they're musicians, figure quotes, but like they're not even any good. Like I expected that to be a much bigger angle coming into the movie, because I guess that's the only thing I vaguely knew is that they were like maybe like a garage band or something. I thought that'd be a bigger part of the movie, but no, they literally just do air guitars whenever something sick happens. Like that's all that it really amounts to, particularly in the first movie. And I think that's one of the reasons I just wasn't as taken with the second movie, and that's the thread, that feeling that like made me feel like warm and fuzzy and nice in the first movie, not as strongly there, because it feels like to some degree Bill and Ted 1 is about very purposefully being young, whereas Bill and Ted 2 is about Bill and Ted.
And this is where I am going to cut you off for us to get into spoilers, because we can dive deep into that idea in there. But we do need to talk a little bit about the fact that if you enjoy the show, you can leave us a review on iTunes. Support us on Patreon, patreon.com/BADHcast. Tell a friend. Follow us on Twitter @BADH_cast. And next week, we are continuing our journey through this happy time that we are making for ourselves and watching Little Shop of Horrors. So stick around for that one.
More 80s.
More 80s, indeed. Jackson, take it back over right where you left off. For what it's worth, these are fairly light spoilers. There's not like a whole big thing that we're going to be diving into about like the ending moments of either of these movies. It's more about the feelings of them, because there's not really a thesis to either of these movies other than be excellent to each other and party on, dudes.
Which is excellent, which is great. But so I managed to bamboozle Sean.
I'm so upset about this.
Because even as he reported when we were coming in, while I was giving him my spiel to like let him know what I was thinking about watching the movies, Sean was even thinking like, how the fuck is Jackson going to bring Metal Gear Solid into this? He's going to do it, but I literally cannot see how. It's impossible. He's going to try his hardest, but it can't be done.
I have spent the past 3 days, and that is not an exaggeration, thinking about these movies and trying to figure out Jackson's way to weasel Metal Gear into this conversation. I did not think it could be done.
Well, here we are. So, there's this game. It's called Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriot.
And everyone take your headphones off. We'll be back in 5 minutes.
So, the thing about Metal Gear Solid 4 that it is most routinely criticized for now is that Metal Gear Solid 1 through 3 were created with a very particular goal in mind. They each had like a vision on like a theme or a character or an idea or all three or whatever, and they went and executed on it. Where Metal Gear Solid 4, you know, it's a pretty divisive game that does have a lot of defenders, but where the people who don't like it tend to, what the feeling boils down to is that Metal Gear Solid 4 was not made because the designers wanted to explore a theme or an idea or a character, although the game does have all those things. The main problem is that Metal Gear Solid 4's end goal was to be Metal Gear Solid 4, to wrap up everything in the saga, to like tie up all the loose ends, to, you know, be a fan service sequel and please everybody. And they lost the magic, the originality, the vision of what made the first three games great. So too do I feel this way about Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. It's not as charged as like Metal Gear Solid 4 because it's not as heavy as that, but indeed I did notice some similarities in that, like with both scenarios there is a lot of, all right, what did people like about the first one and what can we do? Wouldn't it be cool if we did Evil Bill and Evil Ted? Wouldn't it be cool if Bill and Ted go to hell? Like, wouldn't it be cool if we do the time travel Keikaku plan, but like we elaborated on it a little bit with like a villain? And that, although a lot of these bits are cool and are good and are fun, I am left with this feeling, and I felt this way about like half an hour into the movie, like around the time that Evil Bill and Evil Ted drag them off to meet their ends was where I sort of started to see or get this feeling that like, okay, this is, it's almost like, it weirdly enough, like almost like Bill and Ted like was too dedicated to its own lore, weirdly enough, which is also something it has in common with Metal Gear Solid 4. But yeah, like it's hard to explain because it's really intangible and people won't feel this way. But in many ways, it felt like a typical sequel, like the kind that we don't see a lot of anymore, at least in movies, I feel like, where there is a lot of like, what do we do? How do we top the first one? And to its credit, especially for the time period, you know, being the late 80s, early 90s, a lot of those sequels are literally just the same movie as the first one, again, usually a lot worse. Like Jaws 2, I'm gonna, like, I haven't even seen Jaws 2, and I'm gonna go ahead and like put money on the fact that Jaws 2 is just, there is another shark. Like,
what if shark but more?
Not even what if shark but more, because like even like aliens can claim that there's like a change to that dynamic. Like this isn't even just what if there were two sharks, this is what if there was another shark. And so that's how a lot of sequels back in the day were like. So to its credit, Bill and Ted 2, The Bogus Journey, does try a lot of unique things, but the overall feeling that I still got while watching it, without sort of that purity of like the youthful energy and maybe seeing the cracks a little bit more on like how do we make a most excellent sequel, it lost me a little bit.
So I want to talk a little bit about the unique moments that Jackson is referring to, because I do I pretty much wholeheartedly agree with Jackson that basically what they did was said we need to make Bill and Ted again, but wouldn't it be cool if they did this and this and this? I think part of what that was to take the Game of Thrones approach and subvert expectations, because there's a lot of elements of this film that are basically beat for beat Bill and Ted 1, but then instead at the end it flips it on its head. Like Evil Bill and Evil Ted, like it's literally a reference to the first one. They're like, dude, I don't know, should we trust ourselves? And like, they're us, what can they do wrong? Oh yeah, and then they go and trust themselves. And in the first one, it was a good decision. In this one, it's a bad decision. So like, they take these ideas that change the very fabric of Bill and Ted, and they're not necessarily terrible ideas. It's a subversion in a way that honestly works and does lead us to some very good moments. But I think it was so much in that time period of we just need to make the same movie again with some slight differences and people will go see it again. We're just going to slap a 2 on it. It's more. Come on. Y'all want more. Come on. Give us that money. It's more. It's what you want. But they're trying to be a little bit clever with it. Like, it is more, but we're gonna do some stuff with it that you aren't expecting. We're gonna kill Bill and Ted in like minute 24 or something like that, which is it's shocking. It's a very different thing, but it feels like it's in favor of just subverting expectations. Again, goes interesting places, does interesting things, but to no real end other than subverting expectations and getting them to go to hell, go to heaven, meet an alien, make robots that will fight other robots in a reference to Rock'em Sock'em robots. It doesn't, there's nothing more to it than that. It just is what it is. Whereas the first one is filled with small little bits like Freud constantly holding something phallic in his hands. Like that's smart, that's clever, but that doesn't exist in Bogus Journey because they're so concerned with just changing it a little bit.
It's maybe a little too wacky. And granted, like, that does result in some pretty memorable stuff, like the fucking Martian who like fusion dance Cronenberg's into a bigger Martian to build into another, and to build, good Bill and good Ted. Yeah, that was pretty memorable. I'll give him that. But it's like if you had, and granted, like, there's only so much you can do. Like, the first movie is kind of its own perfect movie. Like, it's not like the Bill and Ted characters are so deep that you can necessarily, like, wring a lot of super unique scenarios out of them. So in some ways, I understand the impulse, but it does kind of feel like, really, like, run-of-the-mill mediocre sequel would have just done the first movie again, but made an excuse for them to go to different time periods, right? Like, that's kind of your baseline shitty, like, completely zero-effort sequel, which this is definitely above.
Oh man, last time we did this, we fucked up the time stream. Now we have to go back and fix it again. And so, like, they meet with Billy the Kid again because he was there a lot, Napoleon, and they go back and they undo the butterfly effect that they caused or something like that, and then it ends. Or
oh god, that, see, like, I wasn't even realizing that there was a step lower to what I was saying, because at least in my scenario there were different time periods. But you're absolutely right, that is like the bottom of the barrel.
I mean, that is direct to DVD Disney movie. That is what that is.
So Bogus Journey's definitely got a lot more going on than that, which is good. But in the end, it still just sort of it does feel sort of to me like, all right, like, last time we had Bill and Ted travel through time. We can't do that again. What would be wacky? I don't know. Let's have them die and go to hell. And you know what? Like, that is much more inspired, for sure.
And well done, too. Just for what it's worth, hell looks really good for a low-budget fucking Bill and Ted movie.
This movie in general looks pretty good. Like, some of the wacky, like, ghost effects, like, while dated, are a lot of fun. Like when people
oh god,
yeah.
Yeah. The exorcism is wonderful.
Yeah. It's funny, because even talking about this, like, at first now they're ghosts, and then they go to hell, and then they have to make, like, evil robots, and then there's a Martian. Like, it really does feel kind of like we're gonna pile up all sorts of wacky things. Like, I was sort of expecting, because I read the blurb, so I did know that they died in this. I was expecting something more along the lines of, like, Bill and Ted kind of do the Divine Comedy, which there's some of that.
my God, that's incredible.
Right.
Oh, shit.
Right. So, like, you know, maybe this was just me, like, being somewhat let down because I read the Amazon blurb. But yeah, no, I was expecting them really to commit to that bit. Whereas, like, there's some of that for sure. And that's some of my favorite stuff in the movie. But there's also a lot of weird Martian Cronenberg fusion dance, you know, Evil Bill and Evil Ted. And, like, all these ideas that don't really add up to a singular whole that do kind of feel like, all right, like, this will be wacky, like, you know, just, you know, slap it in there. Come on, guys, we can make it wacky. So,
and I mean, the most inspired stuff, like the stuff that you do remember, tends to be somewhat influenced by other things or have some like smarter element to it. Because again, these movies, especially the first one, while being ostensibly very dumb, are subtly really smart. Like, there is just so much nonsense that is quietly, you have to know what's going on. Like, the whole battle with death for their lives, is a great scene. It's really just impressive visually, but it's also this bizarre reference to Ingmar Bergman, something that, like, okay, sure, that feels like a thing you would do in a Bill and Ted movie. So, like, that's the type of stuff that looks really, really good, and it's clearly a visual reference to Ingmar Bergman movies, and good stuff there, but then there's just so much wackiness. And like, I mean, I'll be perfectly honest, the joke about Station, like, you know, oh, why would the greatest minds in heaven be from Earth? That's a great joke.
that is a great joke, yeah.
Station is fucking wild. Like, what the fuck do you do with Station? If you are unfamiliar, Station's the alien. Aliens. It's kind of both. And there's a really good joke about how it's got a nice ass. I like that too.
Death being insecure about his own ass. It was
so
a good bit.
good. Death is great. Just generally, Death is a wonderful, wonderful character in this movie.
He's the steal. He's the show stealer for sure.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. But outside of that, the alien is just so strange. I mean, I don't have a thesis about that. Just like the alien feels out of place. Like,
100%.
I guess part of that is just like the wackiness of everything that had been going on was still grounded firmly within the realm of humanity. And so, like, when you have that late 80s, early 90s puppet going on, you're just kind of like, I guess this is where we are now, but it feels very out of place.
No, for sure. Because that's the thing, is that the first movie is really wacky. But again, it's also weirdly tight in that, like, the comedy, like, the wacky situations escalate from like some pretty semi-logical, like, character consequences. Like, that bit at the end is just like, we're going to let Genghis Khan out in a mall. And that's going to be funny because he's going to get bored and he's going to try clubbing people to death with like a Louisville Slugger. Like stuff like that. It all feels like it connects back to this idea of like fish out of water, like, you know, mining historical figures for comedy or just general like teenage bro incompetence. Whereas like the second movie, I never feel like it has that same sort of hook. Like, Bill and Ted Do the Divine Comedy is a hook like that, but again, that's not a lot of the movie.
Right. I mean, I feel like we're just circling the same conversation at this point, but it is worth noting that, like, the first one, despite the fact that there are just some kind of weird, not logical leaps, but like just plot beats that feel strange. Like, they meet the princesses, they leave the princesses show up at the end. Like, that feels very strange in a bubble, but like it somehow fits within the flow of the movie at the time, just because at that point you've just accepted that shit's gonna go weird places. And like, why not? Why wouldn't that happen? Why wouldn't George Carlin come up and be like, hey, here's your wives in the future, I got them for you.
No, you know what's super weird? Even about the first one, like, I can't believe they hired George Carlin to have him be such like a calm, like Jor-El-like figure.
Well, I know that originally what they wanted to do is they wanted to have Van Halen play Rufus.
Oh.
Which is also a wild thing because he's Eddie Van Halen.
Right. But that makes more sense to me.
It is funny too because it's very clear that like they had George Carlin for 3 days of shooting. Because they had a budget of hang on, let me just check my pocket. Oh, I got 3 cents and some lint. Yeah, go ahead and make a movie for that, guys.
I have $3.50.
I mean, listen, we are circling. Is there anything else that we really particularly want to talk about? I mean, my final thought on it is definitely watch the first one. Watch the second one, I would also recommend, but watch it while doing something else. I don't think that there's some grand thesis to be made about either of these movies, aside from the second one feels slightly less inspired. But that's not really a thesis, it is just like a review. So...
and much stronger review energy this time, but that's fine. And you know what? I completely agree. I was charmed. I was delighted by Bill and Ted. I was surprised. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about this. I really, really loved it. So definitely watch the first one. The second one, yeah, I mean, if you're in on the Fall Guys fad, it's a good thing to have on in the background while you're playing Fall Guys.
Well, as I have said, I am Sean S. McKinda, Esquire, and you can find me on Twitter at Sean McKinda, and you can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. Find my rating over 25 years later site.com. I think that's all I've got really going on right now.
And I'm Jackson Keller. Please don't actually call me Jack. But you can find me on Twitter at Jackson J. Keller, where, fuck, I don't know.
Yeah, there's kind of like not a lot going on right now, which is nice in a weird way.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't post any skateboarding stuff right now because I fucked up my ankle quite nicely last week, so I'm not going to be doing that right now. So nothing's really happening. Follow the podcast at BADH_cast to let you know when things go out, when things go live, if something changes, or if a bonus episode releases, which will be happening the day after this goes live. And if you want access to that bonus episode, sign up for our Patreon. That's patreon.com/BADHcast. At $1 a month, it gets you access to our Discord, where you can come yell at Jackson and I directly. $5 a month gets you access to our Discord, as well as our backlog of bonus episodes. We've got a ton of movies that we have talked about, and like they're really, really good episodes because these are movies that people recommend, and they're not just things that we stumble on or whatever. Highly, highly recommend listening to those. At $10 a month, it gets you access to everything we've said before, as well as the ability to request bonus episodes. We mentioned this last week. Someone has requested their bonus episode for this month. They don't know that they have, but they have. So get ready for that.
The problem is people keep making meme suggestions, but nobody makes real suggestions. So we have to keep taking the meme suggestions.
They still end up being fucking bangers of episodes.
They do. No, I'm not here to shit on the meme suggestions, but like this is all to say that if you have like a burning desire to like listen to us talk for reals about a movie, it would not be difficult to swoop in and have us do that.
It also gets a little something something.
Thank you so much, Julia, Travis, Pat, Mom, Aunt Summer. Y'all are great. Y'all are excellent.
Also, thanks to Lords of the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. In honor of this fucking band-filled episode, go support bands. Go buy an album. Go buy Lords of the Highway's album. Please, our artists are hurting right now. All of them are. It's a bad time for us. Go support artists. Also, go support 25 years later site.com. There's a little button of us in the corner that you can click on, but you should also go check out the website as a whole. There's a bunch of really talented people doing a lot of really talented writing about a lot of really interesting stuff. So go check that out. Next week, we are officially starting our just feel good month. We've got a list of movies and a show. Hint, hint, for those of you who know what show we talk about somewhat frequently on this podcast.
Ooh.
Coming up next month. So please come back, hang out for that. We're talking about Plant movie. Little Shop of Horrors next month or next week.
Rick Moranis and his Piranha Plant.
My brain is just not working today. Oh, man, the Bill and Ted has gotten to me, man. The Bill and Ted's gotten to me. Stay excellent to each other, dudes.
Party on.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go